Hello world and welcome to this edition of Tech on Fire with Blaze. I'm Blaze Stewart, architect at Winterlight. Today we're going to be taking a look at Cosmos DB Graph API. Hi guys, today we're going to be talking about Graph API with Cosmos DB, and this is one of those things that's better shown than explained. So let's go to a slide and look at how this works. So a graph is really just a collection of nodes and edges. Now, we want to think of our nodes as the things that we want to represent, the entities that we're trying to represent in our graph. So these would be your nouns. This would be people, places, things, and it can be something even abstract in some ways, and we'll talk about an example of that in just a minute. But let's start with just people. So Jack, Jill, and John. And we can have things like phones and laptops. We can have a place like Atlanta, or we can have something that's a little bit more abstract. I guess it's concrete in some instances, but a network. So a network of computers or a network of people, that's not something that you can exactly touch, but that can still be one of those nodes. And these are all of the nouns that we want to represent with our graph. The edges, as you might have guessed, are the relationships between all of these different nodes. And we want to express these edges as a verb of some kind. So Jill lives in Atlanta. This phone is in the Atlanta area code. John owns a phone. John owns a laptop. John is friends with Jack. Jack employs Jill. Jill employs John. So you have these relationships that are expressed in this way. This laptop belongs to this network. So you have all of these different kinds of relationships expressed by these nodes. And where the query language in a graph API comes in is it tries to find relationships between the nodes based on these edges. And any one of these nodes can have a set of properties, basically key value pairs, such as name, place, geography, lat long, that kind of thing. And the edges can have properties as well that express the relationship between the particular nodes that we're trying to find based on traversing the edges to find those nodes. So that is what the graph is trying to give you. And so the query language is going to start with a node or set of nodes, and it's going to try to traverse these edges to find relationships between different nodes based on the criterion that you put into the graph query language. And that's ultimately what the graph API is trying to provide to you. So there's a lot of different use cases for this. As you can see on this graph alone, you can have geospatial data such as a city or a place. You can have something like a network that shows relationships between devices. You can have social networks for relationships between people. And you can also have on a social network relationships between people and places, or people and things like we have here. So these are different kinds of networks and different kinds of graphs that you can represent with the Graph API. Really, it's about showing state. This is not a kind of technology you'd want to use to express transactions, because that's really something you might find in a tabular oriented API such as Table API. But this is going to be more oriented around state and the relationship between objects in a graph like we see here. So I'm here in the Azure portal and I have the Data Explorer pulled up, and I want to show you the data that I have represented in my Graph API right here. So my Graph API, I've imported data that is using nodes and edges. And for my nodes, I have airports, and these are the airports in Thailand. And then for the edges, I have routes between those airports represented by the flight paths that can be taken between one airport and another. So this is using geospatial data, and then the edges are the routes that fly between one airport and the next airport in this particular geography, in this case, Thailand. So if I go into this particular data, I can pull up the graph here and I can execute this query. The query language is called Gremlin. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we look at the code. But Gremlin basically gives me the ability to pull up, if I do g.b with empty parentheses, that's going to give me a view of all of the particular nodes on this graph, which are represented by airports. And these are just the IDs that are assigned to this. So if I click on any one of these, it's going to show me the nodes themselves, and then also the edges. And the edges are represented by the flight paths between them. And so, and if I click on, say, this one right here, it shows me the actual node right here, if I click on this node, it's going to show me the properties. These are the key value pairs that I can use to shape the queries in my data. I can also look at the various edges too here. It says edge label flies to, and this shows me the relationship here, and it flies to this node right here, which is Don Muang Airport, and this is Naratawat Airport in this particular geography. Now, it's difficult to see this on a map in this particular view here, but if I put this on a map, you could show all of the airports and their geographies based on this lat long, and then I could click on any one of these to show you the actual relationships they have with each other. So that's exactly what I'm going to do in my sample application. I'm going to take this and then I'm going to superimpose it on top of a map so that I can click on any one of these different nodes, and then I can then get the airport routes between those given nodes. But this is actually showing you inside the database. But I'm going to go over to my app and I'm going to show you some of the code I wrote, and it's going to show you the Graph API language, which is called Gremlin, that has queries as a part of it. And that's going to give me the ability to actually query the data using the Graph API to pull back data, and then I can put that onto the map. So let's go take a look at how that code works. So I'm going to show you the code I used to create the data source for this. I got this data from a site that provides data for airports and flights. It's free data, and I'll put a link in the video description below that you can use to download this. But I have airline and airport.dat right here, and that just is a CSV of all the airports and all the flight data and all the flight routes in the world, but I'm only using a sample of it for my graph. So if I open up this right here, this particular one, I can see here that I have a couple of things right here. I have an endpoint, I have a user, I have a password, and then I have a country, and this is just a filter. This is the data I need to use to connect to Azure Cosmos DB, and I got this from the Azure portal. So the endpoint is going to be this right here for the Graph API. You need the name of your database account. Then this is the Gremlin API, cosmos.azure.com. And this is the name of the collection, which is DB's Airport Collections Thailand. And then this is the password right here. It's just the key. And then you can get that all data from the portal. Now, I'm using a Node.js right here for this particular demo, and it's basically just going to import data. I've already run this, so I'm not going to run it again, but basically it's just reading those CSVs, and it's using the CSV data to create the graphs that are going to be represented inside of my Graph API. And this one is just basically reading the data right here, creating an object, and then putting that back into the database. So this right here is using Gremlin to add objects to the database. So this is a Gremlin query that says g.addv, which is basically add vertice or add node. And then based on that, it's going to have a property right here, a list of properties. And that is, property, airport ID, name, city, so on. And you see the same thing going right here. It's just adding the route, which is the edge, which is basically setting up the edge right here. And that is going to create a new edge for me. That's using the Gremlin language. So once I run that, I'm basically just creating this query right here. And that is what I'm using for Gremlin. And then these loops are basically just iterating that, populating it, and then adding it to the database based on this loop right here and this loop down here. So that is really what this is doing. It's really nothing fancy. It's just importing the data. And I'll provide this code to you if you want to browse it. I'll put it up on a GitHub repo, and I'll link that in the video description below. But once you run this, it creates a data source based on the data that's in those CSV files. And then I can use this code to populate the database. Now, to use this, I wrote a little sample app using .NET, and it's running in this is .NET Core. I think it's running in .NET 5 right now. So this is a fairly recent version. I had to update this code because I wrote it a while ago. But in any case, this is using an MVC pattern, model view controller. So it's using a controller, and I've got a lightweight GUI that's all baked into this index.html right here. But the controller is really the thing that does all the magic here. And I'm not using in particular glorious patterns here. It's just using a API to access the data. So in this case, I'm using the same thing that I had before. I have the .NET APIs that I'm using to connect with this. And so I'm using the .NET APIs in this case. And this one uses an auth key and a database, a port number, and then a host name to access that. And that's what this looks like. And it's able to intelligently construct this right here to connect to the Gremlin server. So the database is airport, the collection is Thailand, and then it's using a .NET Gremlin a SDK for creating the connection and creating the client, and based on that same data that we had in the Node.js file. And so once it creates that, it's just basically creating a Gremlin server and a Gremlin client to get that data connected up to my app. And then I have a couple of APIs here. And so this one right here is just kind of my generic route right here that gets all of the airports. So this is basically saying, go give me all of the nodes that have a label of airport. And that's going to give me back a list of all those. And then I can then add that to a payload. And then this one right here is getting me a specific airport. So this is getting it based on the IATA code, which is that little short code that you can use to identify an airport. And this is basically the Gremlin query that's for that. So basically, it's basically going to say, go get me the go to the graph, get me a node that has an airport has a label airport and has an IATA code equal to whatever I passed in on the API. And so that goes to the database, gets the data, and pulls it back. Now, this right here is another query that I have that basically is looking for connected nodes that have an outgoing edge wherein the destination from my origin. So if I click on a given pin that's on the map, it's going to go query this particular data, and it's going to pass back a query into the database that says, here is my origin, has IATA of whatever the IATA origin is, and then it says outgoing edges, give me anything that's connected to it. And that's what this comes right here. That's what this is going to pull back, is basically saying all the edges where this is my IATA code. So given that I only have routes expressed here, I don't have to have any filter on that. I only have routes in this database. And so I'm just grabbing any connection based on any edge that's available, and that's going to go out there and grab it. And then this one right down here is similar. Basically, it's saying, show me a route, get a route between an origin and a destination, and if it, it limits it based on a single one. I don't think that this is being used by my little program, but the API does exist. So these are the queries that I'm using Gremlin. Now, I can't do justice for everything that you can do in Gremlin. It's got a lot of power for traversing edges, and then you can get all the documentation for that. It's provided by mostly Neo4j, which is the the company behind really the Gremlin protocol, but it's implemented in Cosmos DB. And so you can use that for local development, or you can just use Cosmos DB. And I'm using a serverless plan here, so it actually works fairly well for this demonstration. So that is a link in the video description below if you want to learn more about the Gremlin query language. But it's pretty straightforward once you kind of get your head around it. It's a little bit idiosyncratic in that it uses this expression that uses a lot of parentheses and has labels and all these other different kinds of query functions that allow you to traverse data on a graph. So once you get your head around that, and you can build queries just like this using a .NET API and return data. My little code right here, this is just a simple index.html. It's using the Google Maps, and it's a developer version since I don't have a license to legally use this. It's just for demonstration. In any case, you can get a production license if you want and plug that in, but it'll be for production-oriented applications. But this is just using the Google Maps API. And this one right here is basically looking for a click on the map, and it's querying the database. It's going out and getting the database right here. That's the API based on the IATA code. And then it will go out and pull those back, and then add those pins to the database, and basically looping over all of those pins, and then looking for the geodata, and then dropping a pin on the map when this loads. And then anytime that you click on one of those pins, it goes out and grabs more data and gets the destinations for it. And so that's how this is working right here. And so that's basically the kinds of things that you want to have available here. So this is the one that actually populates the pins, and this is the one that handles the click. So let's go ahead and run this, and I'll show you how this works. It's pretty straightforward. It's not real fancy, but it'll show you kind of the working example of how this particular thing is going to work out. And so I'm going to go back to index.html once this loads up, and it should give me, this is the Swagger for it if you actually want to play with the Swagger document. But this right here is index.html. Will show you the airport map, and this should load Thailand. And say, okay, I can't load the map correctly because this is a dev purposes only, but I have it zoomed in on Thailand right here. And so first thing it did is it loaded the API, and then it went out to the database, queried the database, and then it pulled back all of these airports in Thailand. And then it dropped the pin on the map, and that data came from Cosmos DB. And so if I click on, let's say this airport right here, it shows you the destinations that these are routes that you can fly to from this airport. This one is Suvarnabhumi in Thailand, and this is Don Muang, which is another airport. Those are the two big airports in Bangkok that you can use to fly basically anywhere into Thailand. But then you can click on Chiang Mai, or that's Lampang. Oh, that's Chiang Mai, and this is Lampang right here, Lamphun and Lampang, and fly and get the destinations for any of those airports. Most of everything comes in and out of Bangkok down here, though, and one of its two airports. But you can see the routes that are represented by those green lines right there. So if I refresh this, and then let's look at one of the less populated airports right here. Let's say Chiang Mai right here. It's going to fly to a fairly large number of airports. It's probably the third most busy airport in Thailand, and then you have an airport in Lampang, and then you have one down here, let's say in Phuket, and this was Krabi, and most of those are going back to Bangkok or what have you. If you wanted to fly into Pattaya, Pattaya is down up here somewhere. Let's try Pattaya. I'm not sure where Pattaya is on this map, but in any case, you have these different airports that you can fly into in Thailand, and it just basically is showing you the routes based on a query back to the database, wherever it might be. So again, a fairly straightforward demonstration, but this is using geospatial data that's tracking it based on flight paths between these airports. So this is probably one of the canonical use cases for a graph database, but it does give you the idea of the kinds of things that you can do with a graph database and the kind of data that's available to you. You can traverse those edges to figure out where things are. You could find routes between these if you're working on an airline application or something like that. There's a lot of things that you can do with it, but again, it's up to you what you want to do with it, but it's pretty straightforward using Cosmos DB. If you like this content, please consider checking us out online at www.winelect.com, where you can find several blog entries about topics related to Microsoft Azure and software development. And you can also subscribe to this channel by clicking the subscribe button below and then clicking on the bell icon to receive notifications when new content becomes available. Until next time, thanks.